What is the difference between a community and a cult? In the digital age, that line is becoming dangerously, almost imperceptibly, thin. We tend to think of cults in antiquated terms: isolated communes, remote gurus, esoteric beliefs. But the modern cult is far more insidious and far more integrated into our daily lives. It doesn't demand your physical presence in a compound. It demands your constant, undivided attention, your unwavering loyalty, and your deep emotional investment through a screen. Its leader is not a remote prophet, but a charismatic and relatable influencer who offers a powerful sense of belonging and identity in exchange for your absolute devotion. The most successful creators have, consciously or not, mastered the art of building these content cults, powerful, self-contained ecosystems where the brand becomes an ideology, the content becomes scripture, and the fans, and even the inner circle, become devoted acolytes. Tonight we are proposing a controversial but powerful thesis, that the Tana Mongeau friend group, at the peak of its power, functioned less like a group of friends and more like a high-functioning and incredibly successful content cult. We will analyze the classic psychological structures that were unmistakably at play: the singular, charismatic leader who defines the reality and morality of the group, the financially and socially dependent inner circle, the shared, all-consuming ideology of radical authenticity, and the ultimate, inevitable schism that occurs when a key member begins to deprogram and chooses to escape. This is not just a story about a podcast ending. It's a deep-dive analysis into the cult-like dynamics that are coming to dominate the modern influencer world and the immense, often hidden, psychological price of belonging. Every cult-like structure, from the most benign to the most destructive, is built around a single, undeniable center of gravity: the charismatic leader. This figure is more than just a boss or a friend. They are the sun around which all planets must orbit, the individual who single-handedly defines the group's reality, its values, its purpose, and its enemies. In the ecosystem of the canceled podcast and its surrounding universe, Tana Mongeau was the quintessential charismatic leader. Her immense power was derived from a potent combination of her massive, pre-existing audience, her significant financial success, and her magnetic, if notoriously volatile, personality. She didn't just join a world, she created one, and to be a part of her exclusive inner circle was to be granted a passport to that world's power, its social relevance, and its considerable financial opportunities. A key psychological component of this dynamic, and a hallmark of high control groups, is the deliberate or incidental creation of dependency. Members of the inner circle, including and especially Brooke Schofield, were not just her friends. Their careers, their social standing, and often their very public identities were deeply and inextricably intertwined with their proximity to Tana. The canceled podcast was the most potent and public example of this. While the platform undeniably made Brooke a star in her own right, it was a platform that existed entirely within Tana's world, under the umbrella of Tana's production company, and was initially marketed to Tana's massive audience. This created a powerful, if unspoken, dependency. To reject Tana was to risk rejecting the very foundation of one's own success. This dynamic is a classic feature of high control groups. The leader provides immense, life-changing benefits: fame, wealth, a powerful sense of purpose and belonging. But it often comes at the implicit cost of personal autonomy and the freedom to dissent. The inner circle becomes psychologically conditioned to believe that their success is not entirely their own, but rather a gift bestowed upon them by the benevolent, if demanding, leader. This creates a powerful incentive to remain loyal, to overlook toxic or erratic behavior, and to continue diligently performing one's assigned role within the group. The perceived cost of leaving is not just the loss of a friendship, but the potential, terrifying collapse of one's entire career and social existence. It's a beautifully decorated, gilded cage, where the bars are forged from opportunity, and the lock is a complex mechanism of loyalty and fear. Every successful cult needs more than just a leader. It needs a core ideology, a compelling set of beliefs, values, and rituals that bind the group together, give it a sense of higher purpose, and clearly separate it from the corrupt and inauthentic outside world. For the Tana Mongeau content cult, the central unifying ideology was a powerful and seductive gospel of radical authenticity. The canceled podcast was their weekly sermon, the sacred space where this ideology was preached, performed, and reinforced for millions. The core tenets of this demanding belief system were simple yet absolute. No secret is too dark or too embarrassing to share. No personal boundary is too sacred to cross for the sake of generating, and extreme vulnerability, no matter how chaotic or self-destructive, is the ultimate and most noble form of strength. Within this system, oversharing wasn't just a content strategy, it was a fundamental ritual of purification and a recurring test of loyalty. By publicly confessing their sins, their romantic failures, and their most chaotic stories on the podcast, the members of the inner circle continually reinforced their commitment to the group's core belief system. This act of ritualistic confession created a powerful sense of us versus them. Us, the real ones who aren't afraid to be messy and expose our flaws, versus them, the fake, curated, and dishonest influencers of the outside world. This ideology was incredibly seductive, particularly to a young audience that craved genuine connection and instinctively rebelled against the polished, manufactured perfection of traditional media and corporate influencer culture. However, this relentless demand for constant, performative authenticity is a psychologically taxing and ultimately unsustainable ideology. It creates a high-pressure environment where personal trauma is not something to be processed privately and healed, but something to be immediately mined, packaged, and converted into public content for consumption. It fundamentally erodes the very concept of a private self, a space where one can exist without the judgment of an audience. To be a loyal and high-ranking member of this cult, you had to be willing to continuously sacrifice your personal life and your boundaries on the altar of the brand. For a significant period, the immense rewards of fame, wealth, and a powerful sense of belonging made this sacrifice seem worthwhile. But as we would soon see, a belief system that demands the complete and total erosion of the individual self is, by its very nature, a ticking time bomb. The collapse of a high-control group or cult-like structure is almost always triggered by the same pivotal event. A key member, often a high-ranking one, begins to question the leader and the group's core ideology. This process is akin to a slow and often painful deprogramming. The member starts to develop an outside perspective, an external frame of reference that allows them to see the group's internal dynamics with fresh, critical eyes for the first time. Brooke Schofield's personal and professional evolution, and her eventual departure from the group's orbit, is a textbook case of this difficult psychological journey. For years, Brooke was a loyal and incredibly effective high priestess of the cult's ideology of chaos. As the grounded narrator, her primary job was to translate Tana's chaotic sermons into something relatable, palatable, and often humorous for the masses. She was the essential bridge between the charismatic leader and the outside world. However, her own burgeoning independent success began to serve as her primary deprogramming tool. As her personal brand grew exponentially, as she began to secure her own high-profile sponsorships and cultivate her own fiercely loyal following, she was no longer entirely dependent on Tana for her professional survival or her sense of self-worth. This newfound financial and social independence gave her something incredibly dangerous to any charismatic leader: leverage and an objective, outside perspective. She started spending more time in different social circles, interacting with other creators and industry professionals who had healthier, more defined work-life boundaries. She was, piece by piece, building a world for herself that existed entirely outside the high-pressure, all-consuming ecosystem of the chaotic sun. It was likely during this period that the group's core ideology of radical authenticity began to feel less like a form of liberation and more like a demand for endless self-exploitation. The constant chaos, the shocking lack of boundaries, the relentless pressure to perform vulnerability for content. These were no longer just the price of admission to a glamorous world. They were the bars of a cage. Her eventual departure from the podcast wasn't just a career move. It was a profound act of apostasy. It was a public declaration that she no longer subscribed to the core tenets of the cult, a powerful and deliberate choice to reclaim her own narrative, her own stability, and her own private self. When a key member publicly defects from a high-control group, the leader's response is often swift, predictable, and brutal. It is typically not one of sadness or reflection, but of strategic, calculated excommunication. The departing member must be shunned, framed as a traitor or a weakling, and made into a public example to ensure the unwavering loyalty and continued compliance of those who remain. The aftermath of Brooke's departure followed this dark psychological script with almost textbook precision. The most powerful tool of enforcement was the strategic and highly public shunning that occurred in the weeks and months that followed. The alliance between Tana's loyal enforcer, Paige, and Brooke's former devoted confidant, BB, was a classic cult tactic, a masterclass in psychological warfare. By publicly embracing and elevating the person who was once closest to the apostate, the leader sends a chilling and unmistakable message to everyone else in the group. Loyalty to me is absolute, and anyone who was once loyal to the traitor must now prove their loyalty to me. It's a deeply manipulative move designed to completely erase the apostate's influence, absorb their former allies, and reinforce the leader's total and unquestionable control over the group's social reality. As of September 2025, this schism remains deep, permanent, and publicly visible. We now have two separate and distinct worlds that rarely, if ever, interact. Tana's world continues to function with a new, more consolidated, and seemingly more compliant inner circle, where loyalty to the leader is presumably valued above all else. Brooke, the apostate, has successfully built a new life and a thriving new career completely outside the cult's walls, a world built on her new, contrasting ideology of stability, professional boundaries, and curated success. This outcome is a testament to the immense difficulty and psychological fortitude required to leave such an all-encompassing ecosystem. The public shunning and social warfare that followed her exit were not just petty drama. They were the predictable and brutal immune response of a high-control system attempting to purge what it perceived as an existential threat to her existence. Viewing the Tana Mongeau saga through the dispassionate and analytical lens of a content cult provides a powerful and deeply unsettling framework for understanding the invisible forces at play in the modern influencer world. It reveals with stark clarity how the seductive and deeply human promise of community and belonging can curdle into a toxic and unsustainable demand for absolute loyalty and complete self-sacrifice. The story of the canceled empire's collapse is not just about a friendship ending. It is a profound cautionary tale about the inherent dangers of charismatic leaders who, intentionally or not, demand that their followers' entire lives be subsumed into the all-consuming machinery of the brand. This psychological deep dive forces us, as consumers and creators, to ask critical and often uncomfortable questions. How do we spot the difference between a healthy, thriving online community and a high-control group that demands too much from its members? How do we, as creators, build a powerful brand without sacrificing our own identity and the emotional well-being of those around us? The legacy of this fallout is a stark and necessary reminder that the ancient psychological dynamics of power, control, and devotion are as potent and as dangerous in a Beverly Hills mansion as they are in any remote, isolated commune. The fundamental human need to belong is a powerful and beautiful force, but as this story proves with chilling finality, the cost of that belonging, when the price is your own authentic self, can be far, far too high.